The Last of Us Part 2 is perhaps the most controversial game ever made, and that's something I think we can all agree on. It's a game that managed to take a fanbase that adored the first game, a game loved by 99% of players, and split that fanbase in half. One side loves The Last of Us Part 2 and the other side simply hates everything the game did. And in a way, I can understand part of that hate. Even though it won hundreds of awards, sold extremely well, and is genuinely loved by critics, it's a game that made many risky, bold decisions, let's say. Be careful with the obvious spoilers I'm about to give here in the video. The game managed to turn one of the most beautiful games ever made, one of the most special stories ever told in gaming, into what eventually became a franchise remembered mostly for the division caused by the second game. But not everything is bad. Technically, the game is something that to this day I don't think any other has surpassed. Graphically, it's one of the most stunning games ever created, and remembering that it was originally made for that loud airplane we call the PS4, remember that the original fat PS4 runs The Last of Us Part 2. Think about how impressive that is. The gameplay is so fluid that it actually feels weird going back to the first game, especially because the stealth is unbelievably good. The enemy AI and the kind of freedom in how you can approach situations is excellent. The acting in this game could easily win an Oscar, it's that good. The soundtrack is one of the best I've ever heard, and everything from a technical standpoint is outstanding. But the narrative part is where things get complicated. And today I want to talk to you guys about what could have been a possible spin-off slash DLC for The Last of Us Part 2, one that would have Tommy as the protagonist, and listen to Neil Druckmann himself talking about it.
I did some other interview where someone asked me about The Last of Us and would there be any more stories or something, and I mentioned, like, you know, we have written a story that takes place after Last of Us 2 that stars Tommy, and I hope one day we get to make it. And the headlines across the industry were like, Naughty Dog has outlined Last of Us Part 3. And that's actually wrong. It was always a small story. It was never like a full title. At the time, we had higher priorities at Naughty Dog, was like to fix our pipeline, to fix work-life balance issues. Just based on where we were, I didn't want to prioritize this story, so that story was shelved. And I still believe one day it will see the light of day. I don't know if it'll be a game or a show, TBD.
It's important to remember that Neil described this story not as a full game, not a big, complete game like both The Last of Us titles are, but as something smaller, and that's why it fits more as a DLC than a brand new game. But as you heard him say, there's also the possibility that this story could be taken out of the drawer it was placed in and turned into a show. Honestly, if someone had told me that when Season 1 of The Last of Us came out and it was well received, I would have believed it. I genuinely think a Tommy spin-off series and HBO trying to extract the maximum out of The Last of Us could have been possible, but after Season 2, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. Of course, none of this stops the story from being turned into a DLC, but we have to look at the facts. The Last of Us Part 2 is already 5 years old and will turn 6 next year. Naughty Dog is fully focused on their next game, and I think there are just too many factors pointing to this specific DLC never happening. The timing simply isn't there anymore. But if one day Naughty Dog decided to make this DLC as a sort of gift for the fans, what exactly would it be about? As you heard Neil Druckmann say, the story he created was set after the events of The Last of Us Part 2, which in my opinion complicates things a bit. For those who remember that deeply traumatizing game well, Tommy is one of the characters who suffer the most. He literally ends the game with nothing. He lost his brother, lost his wife, lost his leadership position in Jackson, lost the ability to pursue revenge because he was left limping, he went blind in one eye and can no longer use his sniper. He literally lost everything he loved. And all those events about the game kind of corrupted him. They turned him into a man who's no longer who he once was, someone consumed by revenge, someone who got lost in the middle of so much tragedy. By the end, he doesn't even feel like the Tommy we knew before. Those days in Seattle traumatized him so much, it's like he aged 5 years in a span of 1. He's very different from who he once was. Different from Ellie and Abby, who despite everything they went through, managed to break free from that cycle, managed to escape revenge. Especially Ellie, she managed to escape that thirst she had. She still suffers from it, but by the end of the game, it feels like she genuinely wants to overcome it and try to move on. Tommy hasn't moved on. Remember, he was the one who took Abby's location to the farm so Ellie could go after revenge one more time, since he himself was too weakened to go. And that leaves this DLC in a weird position. Looking at this as a DLC, as a game, it would be practically impossible to create a DLC with the Tommy we see at the end of the game. game because gameplay-wise, controlling a limping man who can't see from one eye wouldn't be very interesting. It would remove basically all of the gameplay, unless they somehow manage to innovate with a completely different gameplay style. Otherwise, I can't see a version of this story that isn't built mostly around flashbacks. Tommy is one of the most beloved and most interesting characters in this franchise, and also one of the most emotionally complex. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who can overcome something on a level of what happened in the second game, and that's exactly why I think his journey trying to overcome it would be so much more interesting. Since Neil said it would be a story set after the events of the second game, I think it would be really interesting to have a story where the gameplay isn't even necessary. Let me explain. Tommy returns to Jackson, we would see how everything is over there now, he could try to regain people's trust and maybe even Maria's love, but mix that with flashbacks. For example, he arrives in Jackson in the present, and then the story cuts to a flashback of him finding Jackson for the first time, and during that flashback sequence we could have the gameplay against infected, against enemies in general. This way we would learn more about Tommy's past while also having story that progresses in the present. He sees Maria again after some time apart, and then we get a flashback of how they met, how they fell in love, and how they became the leaders of Jackson. Maybe it would be a bit confusing, but I think it would be very well received, and in my view, personally, I don't really see any other direction a Tommy-focused story could take, because going after revenge again, that would be the exact same story as the second game, and part 2 already closed that theme perfectly. Those who pursue revenge lose everything and blah blah blah. So it would be much more interesting to see a character as troubled as Tommy dealing with loss, and dealing with the fact that he has to accept it. Think of a DLC similar to Left Behind, which mixes Ellie's present with her past and manages to connect everything while advancing her character without really changing much overall. It simply deepens a character we already love, and it's very plausible to imagine that they could do a DLC like that with Tommy. First, it wouldn't be anything new for Naughty Dog to mix present-day storytelling with flashbacks, and second, I think it's a story that fits best with something set after the events of part 2, specifically with Tommy. But here comes what for me might be an idea just as interesting as that one. In the game, we have the point of view of Ellie and Abby. Those are the two characters whose perspectives we follow and we control. But even when the game first launched, there was something fans wanted: Tommy's point of view, his 3 days in Seattle. And I know that idea might not be as exciting on the surface because after all, we already know how things end for him, but to me the most interesting part, besides playing as Tommy and experiencing an even more violent, revenge-driven gameplay style, would be connecting those events with flashbacks from his past. It's basically impossible to escape flashbacks in any of the possible ideas. It would be really cool to tie together what he did in Seattle, all that violent destruction, all those kills, with what he and Joel did in the early days of the apocalypse during those first years after the outbreak. Ellie herself says they did a lot of things that they regret, and that's just the stuff they were willing to talk about. For example, while playing through Tommy's day 1 in Seattle, when he's torturing those two guys in the Cervina hotel, the ones Ellie and Dina later find, why not jump to a flashback of the first time Tommy and Joel used that torture method back at the start of the outbreak? That would tie the tragic revenge story he's pursuing in Seattle with the emotional weight of having Joel appear in the game, and they could do that several times over the 3 Seattle days, just like what happens a bit with Ellie. It would explore one of the most interesting and intriguing part fans have wanted for years, those unseen years that we know were traumatizing for both of them.
This is how you gonna repay me, huh?
Repay you?
For all those goddamn years I took care of us.
Took care. That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it?
I bring you the cure from mankind, and you wanna play the pissy little brother.
We ain't back in Boston. You lay your hands on me again, it won't end well for you.
This scene alone is enough to make us want a game set during those 20 years, but even a DLC that did what we're talking about would be enough to give people that long-awaited taste. And this taste is something fans have been asking for years, and it would surely sell extremely well. A game about Joel and Tommy during that time skip years we saw in the first game is something guaranteed to succeed. We would see what Joel did after Sarah's death. Did he go after a Fedra general who ordered the shooting? Who knows? Another similarity between between him and Ellie, a quest for revenge? How did Joel meet Tess? How did Joel and Tommy decide to survive? How did they split up? And how exactly did that happen? How did Tommy end up in the Fireflies and why did he leave? How did Tommy meet Maria? There's so much they could unpack that we still don't know. It's a well of opportunities with two of the most beloved characters in the franchise. Imagine just playing with Joel and Tommy at their physical peak, fighting and surviving in a world still early in the Outbreak years, with new factions forming. There's so much to explore. This is all hypothetical, of course, but something I'm fairly sure will eventually happen is The Last of Us Part 3, and I think Neil Druckmann feels the same way.
First game had such a clean concept of like the unconditional love a parent feels for their child. The second one, once we landed on this idea of the pursuit of justice at any cost, justice for the ones you love, it felt like, oh, there's a clean concept here, and there's a through line from the first game about love. If we never get to do it again, this is a fine ending point. And right, last bite of the apple, the story's done. The great thing about working at Naughty Dog is that we don't have to. It's always like, we would love another Last of Us, but if you guys feel like are passionate about something else, we'll support this other thing. Very privileged position to be in. I never take that for granted. I've been just thinking about, okay, is there a concept there? And for now years, I haven't been able to find that concept. But recently that's changed. And I don't have a story, but I do have that concept that to me is as exciting as 1, as exciting as 2, is its own thing, and yet has this through line for all 3. So it does feel like there's probably one more chapter to the story.
Basically, in other words, if the franchise ended with the 2 games we have now, they would be satisfied, and I think we would be too. It's a cohesive story with a complete ending, but one that still leaves room for a possible future, just like Neil himself believes. He has the concept, meaning he doesn't have the full story, but he has what the main themes would likely be. The first game is about love, the second one is about revenge, or a distorted form of justice and loss, and the third, only Naughty Dog knows what it would be about. But I'm certain that if it exists, it would be a story worth telling in this universe. Even though I don't love the story of the second game, there are many aspects I do love. This reveal, let's call it, from Neil Druckmann was made in a Grounded 2 documentary, the making of for The Last of Us Part 2, meaning that from that moment until now, it's possible they have more than just a concept. But those are just speculations and rumors, nothing confirmed unfortunately, but if the director feels like there's one more chapter to this story, we can hope. There are many possibilities for what might come next in this franchise's future projects, but if there's one thing I truly want, it's for them to stop at the right moment. As Neil said, there's still one more chapter and it should be the last. And what do you think? Would you prefer DLC showing what happened to Tommy after the events of the game, or would you rather a DLC covering his 3 days in Seattle? I want to know what you have in mind and what ideas you'd like to see this character explore, because Ellie and Abby would obviously only return in a possible 3rd game, which is still very far away. We still need to get Intergalactic first, and only then can we start thinking about what's coming next for The Last of Us. So tell me what you think about these ideas, if you want them to happen, even if the timing isn't ideal, and as always, thank you so much for watching.